It is the middle of January. Outside your window, the ground is frozen solid. There is no sun today. There was no sun yesterday. The temperature overnight dropped to -12, and the forecast says it is not coming back up until March. And your home is warm. Not from a furnace running on gas you bought, not from a heat pump pulling power from a grid you pay for every month. Warm from sunlight that fell on your property last August. Sunlight that you captured, stored underground, and are now drawing on 4 months later. The way a squirrel draws on nuts it buried in autumn. That is not a fantasy. That is interseasonal thermal storage. And today I'm going to show you how to build a working version of it for $60 using a hole in the ground, sand, salt, and water. No solar panels, no wiring, no inverters, no batteries, no utility company, no monthly bill. This system is called a salt gradient solar pond. It has been studied, tested, and deployed at scale on 3 continents. It is one of the most energy-dense passive solar collection and storage technologies ever documented. And the reason you have almost certainly never heard of it is exactly the reason you've never been told about any of the systems on this channel. Stay with me through every step. This build is practical, measurable, and completely within reach of any person who can dig a hole and dissolve salt in water. Before we dig anything, I need to spend a few minutes on the physics because this system behaves in a way that is genuinely counterintuitive. And if you do not understand why it works, you will make mistakes during construction that will stop it from working at all. Start with a normal pond. On a summer day, sunlight penetrates the surface and heats the water column. The water near the bottom gets warm. Warm water is less dense than cool water. So, the warm water rises to the surface where it loses its heat to the atmosphere through convection and evaporation. The pond stays cool. It collects heat continuously through the day and loses it continuously at the same time. A normal pond is thermodynamically self-defeating as a heat storage device. Nature keeps resetting it. Now, add salt. Specifically, add salt in a controlled gradient. Very high salt concentration at the bottom, very low salt concentration at the top with a smooth transitional gradient between them. Salt dissolved in water increases the density of that water significantly. A liter of saturated salt solution is roughly 20% denser than a liter of fresh water. Now, here is the key. When the bottom layer heats up and tries to rise, it cannot. Its temperature is driving it upward, but its salt content is driving it downward. And the salt density effect wins. The hot water stays at the bottom. It cannot convect to the surface. It cannot lose its heat to the atmosphere. It simply stays hot, getting hotter every day the sun shines, accumulating energy over weeks and months without losing it. The top layer of the pond, low salt content, near ambient temperature, acts as a transparent window, letting sunlight through and into the water column below. The gradient zone between the top and bottom layers acts as a transparent thermal insulator. It transmits solar radiation downward, but physically prevents the heated bottom layer from rising and losing its heat. This combination of transparent solar transmission and convection suppression is what makes a salt gradient solar pond one of the most effective passive solar collectors ever studied. The bottom layer of a well-designed solar pond, given a full summer of solar charging, reaches temperatures between 70 and 90 degrees C. In exceptional cases with strong solar input and a well-maintained gradient, documented measurements have exceeded 100 degrees C in the lower storage zone, above the boiling point of fresh water held liquid by the pressure of the overlying water column and the elevated boiling point of concentrated brine. 70 to 90 degrees C stored underground from summer sunlight, available to heat your home in winter 4 months after the sun that created it has already moved on. The history of this technology is specific and well documented, which matters because it means every performance claim I make today is backed by decades of measured real-world data, not theory. Lake Vanda in Antarctica was the first naturally occurring solar pond documented by scientists, studied extensively in the 1960s. The lake's natural salt gradient produced a bottom temperature of over 25 degrees C in an environment where air temperatures regularly dropped to minus 50 degrees C. A natural pond in Antarctica holding 25-degree water at the bottom, while the air above it was at minus 50. That single measured fact tells you more about the power of the salt gradient principle than any equation I could write on a board. Israel has been the world leader in engineering applications of solar pond technology since the 1950s. The Dead Sea region provided an ideal natural salt resource and intense solar input. And Israeli engineers built and operated multiple large-scale solar ponds from the 1960s through the 1980s. The solar pond at Ein Bokek on the Dead Sea shoreline reached bottom zone temperatures of 90 degrees C and was used for direct industrial process heat. The Bet Ha'arava solar pond, built in the 1980s, was at the time the largest engineered solar pond in the world and generated measured electrical output from its stored thermal energy through an organic Rankine cycle turbine. These are not lab experiments. These are full-scale engineering installations that operated for years and produced documented measured output. In the United States, the El Paso Solar Pond in Texas operated from 1983 through the 1990s, producing process heat for an adjacent food processing facility and generating measured data that validated the technology's thermal performance in a North American climate and solar regime. In Australia, the Alice Springs Solar Pond project in the 1990s demonstrated that the technology functions effectively, even in an arid continental climate, with extreme temperature swings and limited humidity. The physics works. The technology has been proven at scale in multiple countries across multiple decades. What we are building today is the residential DIY version, sized for a single home lot, buildable for $60 and completely within reach of any person willing to spend a weekend with a shovel. The sand line design I'm going to show you today adds one important element to the basic solar pond principle. Lining the pond floor and walls with a 15-centimeter layer of compacted sand before adding your liner serves two purposes. It provides a clean, smooth, puncture-resistant bedding surface that protects your liner from stones or root intrusions over years of use. And it adds a supplementary thermal mass layer directly in contact with the pond's heat storage zone. Sand at the bottom of the pond absorbs heat from the lower brine layer and holds it even if the pond is partially drained or the brine concentration temporarily disrupted. The sand layer is your thermal ballast. It makes the system more forgiving and more durable over the decades of service life you want from a structure this permanent. Here is every material you need: real specifications, real prices, real sources, both North American and international. First item, EPDM rubber pond liner, 4.5 meters by 4.55, 0.75 mm thickness minimum. EPDM is ethylene propylene DNA monomer rubber, the same material used in commercial roofing and high-quality garden ponds. It is UV stable, root resistant, flexible in cold temperatures down to minus 40 degrees C, and has a documented service life in outdoor applications of 30 to 50 years. Do not substitute black polyethylene sheeting. Polyethylene becomes brittle in cold temperatures and will develop microcracking at fold and crease points within 3 to 5 years in a freeze-thaw environment. The EPDM liner is the one component in this build that must not be compromised on specification. Cost for a 4.5 by 4.55 MTTM sheet at North American retail, $17 to $23 from pond supply retailers or online. International equivalent, available in most countries with agricultural or commercial roofing supply chains, $12 to $18 equivalent. Second item, non-iodized salt, specifically bulk agricultural salt, water softener salt pellets, or pool salt. Do not use iodized table salt. Iodine compounds interfere with the optical clarity of the upper water layer and slightly reduce solar transmittance into the pond. Any non-iodized salt source works. You need approximately 120 to 140 kiloliters total to establish a proper gradient in a pond of the dimensions I'm going to give you. In North America, 40 B bags of water softener salt run between $5 each at hardware stores, home improvement centers, or water treatment suppliers. You need 8 to 9 bags. Total salt cost, $40 to $45. This sounds like it might blow the budget, but here is the important adjustment for most international markets. Agricultural salt sold in bulk for livestock or road treatment runs between $1 per 50 kiloliters bag in India, Southeast Asia, Africa, and most of South America. At that pricing, your total salt cost is $3 to $5. The $60 total budget assumes this international salt pricing. North American builders will find their total cost runs $85 to $110 with retail-priced water softener salt. Still the cheapest interseasonal heat storage system you will find anywhere. Third item, clean washed sand. Same specification as the sand battery build. Dry silica or river sand sieved clean of organic material. You need approximately 600 kilo to line the floor and lower walls of the pond at 15 centimeter depth. Source this locally. In most regions, this is free from a riverbank, a quarry, or a construction fill site, requiring only the transport cost. If you must purchase it, a cubic meter of washed sand runs $4 at a building supply yard. Fourth item, black low-density polyethylene pipe, 20 mm diameter, 30 meter total length. This is your heat exchanger coil, the loop of pipe that sits in the bottom brine layer of the pond and carries the collected heat out of the pond and into your home's hydronic heating circuit. Black polypipe is used rather than copper for one critical reason. Salt water is corrosive to copper over multi-decade timescales. Black polypipe is completely salt corrosion immune, rated for temperatures up to 80 degrees C in standard grade or up to 100 degrees C in high temperature grade, and costs a fraction of equivalent copper. Cost for 30 meters of 20 mm black polypipe, $4 to $8 at irrigation or plumbing suppliers internationally. North American retail, $8 to $14. Fifth item, 2 compression fittings to connect the polypipe heat exchanger loop to whatever distribution system or storage tank you are connecting the pond output to, $2 to $4. Sixth item, edge insulation boards, standard 50 mm thick extruded polystyrene XPS foam board, enough to line the inner perimeter walls of the pond above the waterline. XPS foam is sold under brand names like Styrofoam or Foamular and is available at any building supply store in standard 600 mm by 1200 mm sheets. You need 3 to 4 sheets. Cost $6 to $9. This insulation prevents heat loss from the upper pond edges during winter when air temperatures are below pond temperature. Total system cost at international pricing, $55 to $62. At North American retail with purchase salt, $85 to $110. Before you dig anything, spend one morning choosing the right location. This decision determines your system's performance for the next 30 years, and it costs you nothing to get right. The pond needs maximum unobstructed solar exposure across the full arc of the summer sky, from southeast to southwest in the northern hemisphere. Stand at your proposed site on a clear day in late spring or early summer and observe the sun's path from mid-morning to late afternoon. Any shadow that falls on the pond surface during this window is solar energy you are not collecting. Tree shadows, building shadows, fence shadows, all are obstacles. Site the pond where it receives the longest possible daily solar exposure during the months of April through September, because those are the charging months. This is non-negotiable. A partially shaded solar pond charges slowly and may not reach adequate storage temperatures before winter demand begins. The second site criterion is proximity to the structure you want to heat. The heat exchanger loop that extracts energy from the pond needs to connect to your home's distribution circuit. Longer pipe runs between the pond and the house mean more heat loss in transit and higher installation cost. Site the pond as close to the heated building as your solar exposure criterion allows, ideally within 15 metri, 10 feet, term of the structure. The third criterion is ground stability. The pond will hold approximately 6,000 to 8,000 kilograms of water and sand once filled. That weight sits on the soil beneath the pond floor. You need stable, non-expansive soil, clay-free mineral soil, compacted fill, or bedrock. Heavy clay soils that heave and contract with moisture, changes will stress and potentially puncture your liner over time. If your site has heavy clay soil, add an additional 50 mm sand buffer layer between the excavated soil face and your liner to provide a stable, non-reactive bedding surface. Mark your pond footprint with stakes and string before digging. 3m by 3m square. This gives you a pond with a surface area of 9 square meters, the minimum effective area for a home heating application in a temperate climate. In climates with strong summer solar input and mild winters, this surface area will accumulate sufficient stored heat to meaningfully supplement a well-insulated home's winter heating load. In harsher climates, sustained winter outdoor temperatures below, hard to 15 degrees C, size up to a 4 by 4m footprint for adequate storage volume. Excavate the marked footprint to a depth of 1.5 meters. This is the most physically demanding part of the build. In loose or sandy soil, one person with a standard square-bladed spade can dig a 3 by 3 meters footprint to 1.5 meters in a full day of steady work. In harder compacted soil or clay, allow a day and a half. Work methodically. Remove spoil in consistent lifts. Pile it far enough from the excavation edge that it does not fall back in, and check your depth at multiple points across the floor as you go. When you reach 1.5 meter depth, inspect the floor and all 4 wall faces. Remove any protruding stones, root fragments, or sharp-edged debris from every surface, floor, and walls. You are creating the surface that will contact your EPDM liner, and you want nothing that can work through that liner over years of soil pressure and thermal cycling. Take a flashlight and go over every square centimeter of the excavated surface on hands and knees if the light is low. One missed sharp stone that works through the liner 3 years from now means draining a full pond and repairing it under load. Remove every stone now, and you will never face that problem. Once the excavation is clean, begin the sand lining process. Starting with the floor, add dry sand to a minimum depth of 15 cm across the entire floor area. Rake it level, and then compact it by walking systematically across the full area in overlapping passes. You are not trying to reach engineering spec compaction density. You just want a uniform, settled, smooth surface with no loose high spots that could shift and create a wrinkle in the liner. Take your time getting the sand floor genuinely flat. Lay a long, straight edge across the surface and check for high and low points. High points create liner stress concentrations. Low points allow the liner to pool and bag under load. A flat sand floor is a healthy liner for decades. For the wall faces, you have 2 options depending on the stability of your soil. In stable, cohesive soil, pack sand against the wall faces by hand, working in 150 mm lift layers, pressing each layer firmly against the excavated soil face before adding the next. In loose or granular soil, where the wall face won't stay vertical long enough to allow hand packing, line the walls with your XPS foam insulation boards first, pressing them flat against the wall faces, and pack sand behind the liner once it is in place. Either method works. The critical outcome is a continuous 150 mm sand buffer between the excavated soil surface and the EPDM liner on every surface. Installing the EPDM liner is a two-person job. The liner is heavy, and positioning it accurately in a 1.5 mm deep excavation requires one person at each end feeding it down the walls, while the other guides the center floor section into place. Before unfolding the liner at the pond site, unroll it fully on a flat area nearby, a lawn, a driveway, or a tarp-covered surface. Inspect every centimeter for factory defects, punctures, thin spots, edge tears, or delamination. An EPDM liner defect discovered before installation takes 30 seconds to patch with EPDM tape. A defect discovered after the pond is filled and salted takes a full day to address. Inspect it before it goes in. Lay a piece of rope or string across the liner at its center point in both directions, so you have a cross marking the geometric center. This center mark should land at the center of the pond floor when the liner is positioned correctly. Position the folded liner at the edge of the excavation with the center mark aligned directly above the center of the pond floor. Have your helper hold one end while you slowly feed the liner down into the excavation, allowing it to unroll and drape against the sand-lined walls as it descends. Work slowly and let the liner find the floor profile naturally. Do not pull or stretch it tight against the walls. EPDM has enough elasticity that a liner draped naturally into the excavation will conform to the floor and wall geometry without stressing the material. Allow generous folds at the bottom corners. These corner folds are unavoidable and completely acceptable. Do not try to eliminate them by stretching the liner into the corners. Stretched EPDM at corner points is a long-term failure point. Folded EPDM at corner points is durable and watertight for decades. Once the liner is fully seated with the floor section flat and the wall sections draping up to or above the excavation rim, place temporary weights, filled sandbags, heavy stones, or pieces of timber along the top edges of the liner to hold it in position while you install the heat exchanger. The heat exchanger is the element that connects the stored thermal energy in the pond to your home. It is a loop of black poly pipe that sits on the pond floor, absorbs heat from the bottom brine layer, and carries that heat out of the pond through two pipe penetrations in the liner wall near the base, one supply line and one return line. Coil your 30-meter length of 20 mm poly pipe into a flat spiral, approximately 2.4 mm in diameter, slightly smaller than the pond floor footprint. Work the coil loosely, allowing 100 mm of clearance between adjacent coil passes. Tie the coil loosely at 3 points with cable ties to hold its spiral shape while you work. The two pipe ends, supply and return, need to exit the pond through the liner wall approximately 200 mm above the finished pond floor. Mark these two exit points on the liner on the same wall face and 300 mm apart horizontally. Use a sharp 25 mm hole punch or a drill with a step bit to make clean, round holes at these two marks. EPDM self-seals slightly around penetration fittings under water pressure, but use EPDM-compatible butyl tape gaskets on both faces of each penetration point and tighten your compression fittings firmly to create a fully watertight seal at each pipe exit. Apply a bead of EPDM-compatible sealant, not standard silicone, which does not bond well to EPDM, around both faces of each penetration point, and allow it to cure fully before any water is added to the pond. Lower the coiled heat exchanger to the pond floor and position it centrally. The coil should sit flat with all passes in contact with the sandline floor. Feed the 2 pipe ends through the penetration fittings from inside the pond and connect the compression fittings. The 2 pipe ends that exit through the liner wall will eventually connect to whatever distribution circuit you are using, a domestic hydronic baseboard system, a radiant floor loop, or a thermal storage tank inside the home. For now, cap both ends with temporary caps while you complete the pond construction. This is the most technically precise section of the build and the step that determines whether you have a working solar pond or just an expensive hole in the ground. Read through this entire section before you begin, then follow it exactly. A solar pond requires 3 distinct water layers. From bottom to top, the lower convective zone, dense saturated brine that holds your stored heat. The non-convective zone, the gradient layer where salt concentration transitions smoothly from high at the bottom to low at the top, and the upper convective zone, essentially fresh water at near ambient temperature that lets sunlight through. The lower convective zone should occupy the bottom 500 mm of the pond. The non-convective gradient zone should occupy the middle 700 mm. The upper convective zone should occupy the top 300 mm. Total water depth 1/500 mm. This matches your excavation depth exactly. Begin by filling the pond with fresh water to the 500 mm mark, just above the heat exchanger coil. Now, dissolve your salt into this bottom layer. You are targeting a salt concentration of 26% by weight in the lower zone. This is close to saturation for sodium chloride in water. For every 10 L of water in the lower zone, you need approximately 3.5 ppm of salt. Stir the bottom layer thoroughly as you add the salt. Use a clean length of timber as a stirring paddle. Reach it to the bottom and work it in broad circles until the salt is fully dissolved and the water runs uniformly clear. Cloudy brine means undissolved salt crystals are still in suspension. Keep stirring until it clears completely. This is not quick. Allow 30 to 45 minutes of active stirring for a full lower zone volume. Do it completely. Undissolved salt that settles out later will disrupt your gradient by changing the concentration distribution after you have already built it. Let the saturated bottom zone rest and settle for 1 full hour before building the gradient layer on top of it. Now comes the technically critical step: building the gradient without disturbing the saturated bottom layer. This is where most first-time solar pond builders make the mistake that defeats the entire system. If you simply pour fresh or low salt water directly onto the surface of the brine layer, the downward momentum of the poured water punches through the surface and mixes the 2 layers, collapsing the gradient before it has formed. You must add water to the gradient zone using a diffuser, a device that dissipates the kinetic energy of the incoming water before it can disturb the layer below. Build a simple diffuser from materials you have on hand. Take a standard plastic bucket and drill approximately 40 holes of 6 mm diameter evenly across the bottom face. Suspend this bucket 100 mm above the pond water surface using a piece of timber laid across the pond rim. When you pour water into the diffuser bucket from above, it exits through the 40 small holes as a gentle distributed shower, rather than a single concentrated flow. The shower drops 100 mm onto the pond surface and spreads without penetrating the layer below. For the gradient zone, prepare 6 separate buckets of water at decreasing salt concentrations: 22%, 18%, 14%, 10%, 6%, and 2%. Add each bucket in sequence from highest to lowest concentration, pouring each one slowly through the diffuser, allowing 2 to 3 minutes between each bucket for the newly added layer to stabilize before adding the next. After all 6 gradient buckets have been added, add your final upper convective zone of fresh water. Again, through the diffuser, slowly, allowing 3 to 4 minutes for complete stabilization before you consider the gradient established. Do not stir, do not agitate, do not drop anything into the pond for a minimum of 24 hours after completing the gradient fill. The gradient is in its most fragile state immediately after construction. Any physical disturbance in this window will mix the layers, and you will need to drain and rebuild from the lower zone up. After 24 hours, you can verify the gradient is holding by sampling water at 3 depths: bottom, middle, and surface, using a length of tubing as a simple siphon to draw small samples without disturbing the full water column. Measure the density of each sample with a simple hydrometer, available for $2 to $3 at any home brew supply shop. Bottom sample should read maximum density. Middle sample should read intermediate density. Surface sample should read near fresh density. If all 3 readings show the same high density, the gradient has mixed and needs to be rebuilt. If the readings show a clear density progression from bottom to top, the gradient is established and your pond is ready to charge. Once the gradient is established, the pond charges itself entirely passively from this point forward. Every day the sun shines, solar radiation penetrates the upper fresh layer, passes through the gradient zone, and is absorbed by the dark sand surface at the bottom of the pond. The heat generated there cannot convect upward because of the salt density gradient. It accumulates in the lower brine zone and in the sand layer beneath the liner. The temperature in the lower zone rises day by day, week by week, through the spring and summer months. In a well-constructed solar pond in a temperate climate receiving average solar input, the kind of summer solar resource available across most of Europe, the United States, northern India, southern China, and the equivalent latitudes worldwide, the lower zone will reach 50 degrees to 65 degrees C by late summer. In high insulation climates, the American Southwest, the Middle East, North Africa, the Indian subcontinent, northern Australia, documented lower zone temperatures above 80 degrees C are achievable in a first-year pond, and above 90 degrees C in subsequent years, as the sand thermal mass fully saturates. Heat extraction begins in early autumn when your home heating demand starts and continues through winter. The extraction mechanism is simple. The polypipe heat exchanger coil sitting in the hot lower brine zone is connected to a small 12V DC circulation pump, the same type used in solar water heating systems, drawing approximately 15 to 25 W, that pushes water or glycol solution through the coil. The fluid picks up heat from the brine, exits the pond through the supply penetration, flows to your distribution circuit or thermal storage tank inside the home, gives up its heat, and returns cooler through the return penetration back into the exchanger coil. It is a standard closed hydronic loop. Any plumber can connect it to an existing baseboard radiator circuit or radiant floor loop. Any competent DIY builder can connect it to a thermal storage tank using standard compression fittings and insulated pipe runs. The 12V circulation pump draws less than 2 W per hour on average during a heating season. Over an entire 5-month heating season, its total electricity consumption is approximately 7 to 8 kilowatt, less than running a 60 W light bulb for 5 days. Connect it to a small solar panel, which costs $15 to $20, and even that minimal electricity cost disappears entirely. This is the only electrical component in the system, and it is optional. A thermosiphon configuration using natural convection instead of a pump works in some installation geometries, though it requires careful pipe routing and a heat exchanger position inside the home that is higher than the pond extraction point. The gradient requires periodic maintenance to remain effective, and I want to be completely direct about this because it is the one ongoing task this system demands. Rainfall adds fresh water to the upper zone of the pond, and in heavy precipitation, events can gradually dilute the top of the gradient layer downward. Evaporation from the pond surface during summer removes water but leaves salt behind, which has the opposite effect. It gradually increases the concentration of the upper zone over time. Both of these natural processes work against the gradient and need to be periodically corrected. Check the upper zone density with your hydrometer once per month during the summer charging season. If the upper zone density has risen above 1.05 gribers per cubic centimeter, significantly above fresh water's 1.0, it needs dilution. Add fresh water through your diffuser to bring it back down. If the upper zone density is correct but the gradient zone density readings at mid-depth have shifted upward uniformly, the gradient layer is being compressed from above and needs a fresh diffuser application of the next lower concentration layer to re-establish the separation. During winter, cover the pond surface with a single layer of transparent polycarbonate sheeting, or a floating layer of bubble wrap greenhouse film. This cover serves two purposes. It reduces evaporation losses during the extraction season, and on clear winter days, it continues to allow solar gain into the pond, extending the charging season and reducing temperature drop in the lower zone during the months when you are simultaneously extracting heat. The gradient maintenance is a real task. It takes 30 minutes once per month during the active season. If you are not willing to spend 30 minutes a month maintaining the gradient, this system will degrade within 2 to 3 years and stop performing. If you approach it as a regular seasonal task, the way you would service any other home system, this pond will perform reliably for 20 to 30 years. If this story changes the way you look at the simple resources in your backyard, please subscribe and like the channel. We are uncovering the history and technology they tried to bury. Plant the seeds for your future. The next treasure of knowledge will be opened soon.